Lesson 4, we are moving on now to surface area and volume of shapes. So I have attached a formula sheet for you. On the second page, that's where you will see all of the surface area and volume formulas. So you're still always allowed to use that formula sheet to help you. Surface area, the number of square units needed to cover the surface of a three-dimensional object. So surface area, you kind of imagine there's an object and you're going to wrap it with wrapping paper. And the question for surface area would be, how much wrapping paper would you need if none of the edges would overlap? Volume is different. That's the amount of space that an object occupies, or how much water, for example, you could pour inside of a shape, or how much sand would fill inside of the shape. And that is measured in cubic units. A pyramid, so pyramid and prism are what we're going to talk about today. Pyramid is a three-dimensional object where the base is a polygon. So the base could be a square, it could be a rectangle, it could be a pentagon. It just depends on what shape the base has. But what's important for a pyramid is that the faces are triangles and they meet at a common vertex or a common point at the top. A prism is something different. I always just think of a shoebox or something like that. A prism is a three-dimensional object where the base is a polygon and the faces are rectangles. So surface area, let's just look at surface area of a square-based pyramid, just surface area first. If we're talking about a pyramid and we look at this net, so a net is when you take the shape and you flatten it down and you look at all the pieces that would be needed to make up a square-based pyramid. Just to develop the formula for this shape, in case you didn't have your formula sheet, what is the shape of the base? So if we were going to look for a formula for the base, we might have just area equals length times width for the base. So just this amount in here, the area for that is length times width. Something when it is a square, we could maybe also see it written as base squared. What is the shape of each lateral face? So around the outside, those are all triangles. So a triangle I know is base times height divided by 2. So imagine we have 4 of those though. We have 4 triangles, base times height divided by 2. Hopefully you see that this 4 and that 2 could be divided, and I would just be left with 2 base times height for the 4 triangles. Write an expression for the surface area of the pyramid and simplify the expression. So what I see, if I was going to do surface area, I would look at the surface area of the entire shape is the area, length times width of the base, plus 4 triangles, base times height divided by 2. And that would be a fine formula to use. That wouldn't matter to me at all. That one makes sense. If we simplify, like we did up above, we could write it as length times width plus 2 base times height, if you like that. Or if we are working with a square specifically, we could write this as base squared plus 2bh. When you look on your formula sheet, this is what they have for a square-based pyramid, base squared plus 2bs. This s would represent this here. So instead of using height, they're using a letter S instead. Anything that makes sense to you, I'm not too worried. I do like you to write a formula down. So, I mean, some of these, if you didn't have a square base, you might use this formula that you see up here. It's whatever makes the most sense to you. The next one, if we look at the surface area of a rectangular prism, what I want you to notice for this shape, if we had to cover this all in wrapping paper, I want you to notice some of the similar shapes. So for example, I have a top and I have a bottom, and they are the same size. I also have a front, or maybe say a side and a side over there. And then I have a front and a back to the shape. So if the length is the L and the width is a W and the height is H, something that you'll see more often for surface area of this shape of a rectangular prism, we would do 2 of each. So let's say 2 times width times height plus length times width plus length times height. So the width times the height have to be multiplied by each other, the length times the width have to be multiplied by each other, and the length times the height. Another way you might see this on your formula sheet is where the 2's are distributed. So 2 width height plus 2 length width plus 2 length height. And that's the formula that you'll see. So what I usually do if I don't have these labels, I would label a length, a width, and a height on my shape so I know which numbers to sub into the formula as I go. So example 1, find the surface area of each object. So just surface area right now. So we have a height in here that is the perpendicular height of this whole pyramid. If you can imagine that this makes a triangle, I need to know what this slant height here is down the side. So I'm going to draw that triangle out here. Imagine that that's a right triangle. And halfway across, if the entire way across is 4, halfway across would be 2 centimeters. And we know the height here is 6 centimeters. What I need though, I need this side here. That's the slant height. I could use an S or a C. It doesn't matter what the variable is. But if I use the Pythagorean theorem right now, which you might have to do once in a while, I know that the A is 6, let's say, and the B is 2. So I would do 36 plus 4, and that's the square, c squared would equal 40. I'd have to take the square root of each side, so c is going to equal 6.32 centimeters. So now I'm going to move on to the formula. This is a square base pyramid, so on our formula sheet, because the base is a square, we might just use base squared plus 2bs. Don't forget on the formula sheet as well, they label what is what. So if this is our base here, and then our s is here that we found, that's all we need. So we know our base is going to be 4 times 4, and 2 times our base times our slant height, which is 6.32. And so we have the surface area here being 16, and I'd multiply all those numbers together and get 50.56. So my total is 66.56 centimeters squared, because it's the surface area question. When I see this, there is a nice formula that you'll see on your formula sheet for this. So if we imagine the formula on the formula sheet, I'm worried you might think that it's a little confusing. What I see here, there are 2 triangles though, 1 on each end, and there are 3 rectangles. So I don't mind if you use a formula that you might make up. So the one that's on the formula sheet for surface area, it looks like BL plus AH plus BH. These are the 3 rectangles around the side, and this would be the triangle. I think what make more sense, 2 triangles, base times height divided by 2, plus 3 rectangles, length times width, plus length times width, plus length times width. And those 3 rectangles may or may not be the same size, depending on the triangle. So if I have 2 triangles, you notice that these 2's might cancel out. That's why this was their formula for the triangle. But if I just do the base times the height of my triangles, the base is 3 and the height is 3.6. And then I would do my 3 rectangles, and they are each 3 by 3.5. So I have 3 rectangles around the outside. So these kinds of shapes, you sort of have to peel them apart into all the separate shapes that you have. So now I have 10.8 plus 10.5 plus 10.5 plus 10.5. And my total surface area is 42.3 centimeters squared. Last one here. If we're looking at the surface area right away, I would say, okay, let's make this the length. It wouldn't really matter. Let's make this the width and this the height. I need to assign which one is which because my formula for surface area is 2 times width height plus length width plus length height. So if I've decided that the L is 9 and the W is 8 and the height, so now I know, okay, wait, the first letter is a W, my W is an 8 because I assigned it that way when I started. For multiplication, I might just use a little dot because it might make, or I could use brackets, times the 6 plus the length is 9 times the width I'm saying is 8 plus the length is 9 times the height is 6. So each one gets multiplied by the other one. And then 8 times 6 is 48. And 9 times 8 is 72. And 9 times 6 is 54. So I would add those three numbers up because I'm doing brackets first, and I get 174. And then multiply by 2. And so I get 348 centimeters squared for the surface area. Okay, last page, just a little bit about the formula for a square-based pyramid. So we already know that this formula here is just volume equals length times width times height. We have the base is length times width times the height of the shape. So that one's a pretty easy formula for a rectangular prism. But if we had a pyramid, that's a little bit different. But what I want you to know is that if these pyramids all had the same base size as this one, and they had the same height as this cube, let's say over here, we would have to fill 3 of these up to fit inside of one of these. So the formula that I like to use is just I take the volume of a rectangular prism, and if it's a pyramid, I just divide it by 3. Something that you will see on the formula sheet, I think, for volume here, I think they write it as base squared times height divided by 3. Just imagining that the length and width of the base, if it was a square, we could write it as base squared times height divided by 3. So just 2 last examples here before the homework. Volume for this shape, I like these, length times width times height. Because you're multiplying them all together, it doesn't really matter which number you put first. You could decide this is the length and this is the width and this is the height. If I did it that way, I would do 10 times 12 times 5. But any order of those numbers doesn't matter because we're multiplying them together anyway. And then I get 600 centimeters cubed now because we're actually looking at the volume of the shape. This one here, just remember that it's the same thing as a rectangular prism, but divided by 3 because it's a pyramid. So I really like this formula, but I don't think that that's not on your formula sheet. What they'll show you is base squared times height divided by 3, which does work because our base here is a square. 7 times 7 is here, but we could also just say that that's base squared. So the volume is 7 squared times the height, which is 15, but then you have to remember to divide by 3. So what I would end up with is 49 times 15 divided by 3. I get 245 centimeters cubed.